Game Pass is apparently no longer as viable for developers as it used to be. This comes from PC Gamer, where creators of Slay the Spire and Darkest Dungeon were speaking to various developers coming out of the Game Developer Conference 2024. Slay the Spire's Casey Yano said in regards to Game Pass and Epic Store deals, I talked to at least 5 small teams, like 35 members and under, and they're like, cuts, funding cancelled, talks that were going on for a year, cancelled. It sounds like it's S-word. We're definitely very privileged to be able to self-fund, otherwise I'd be very, very, very scared right now. He says the deals have come down, way down. Darkest Dungeons, Chris Bourassa said the gold rush is over. I come from the Northwest Territories. He's actually from Canada. The town I'm from was built on gold, and then they all found diamonds further north. Maybe another paradigm shift is waiting for us, but I definitely think the scale of the deals I'm hearing about is significantly diminished from the big swinging days. We got our Epic deal at the right time. So obviously Epic and Game Pass being brought in at the same time, but I think there's so much conversation on the idea of monthly monetization models, monthly revenue models. And I wanted to throw in that it was only September last year where Phil Spencer said if Game Pass revenue doesn't meaningfully improve by 2027, that Xbox will be getting out of the games industry. And even last week, we did a news video, me, Stevie, and Side did a video on the stuff that Phil Spencer was talking about and the general state of Xbox sales and things like that. It's I'm not going to pronounce it one way or the other, but it's like every week there's something else about the Xbox side of the general way they're approaching games that it just doesn't feel like it makes sense. Last week it was all the games are what matters, and that's what they don't have, and Xbox sales apparently not being very good across Europe.
They are in a strange situation right now, and it's a shame because, you know, we've always said that Game Pass is like one of the best deals in gaming, if not the best deal in gaming for what you can get on that service and the amount of support that it has from the first-party developers once they actually start releasing things. But I think it was always a case of that is only going to last for a certain amount of time. You know, we always criticize, or at least I always criticize, WB for being about 5 years behind the rest of the gaming industry for whatever reason. It seems to me, at least, that it's a bunch of film executives primarily coming into the gaming gaming industry and making the mistakes that the rest of the gaming industry have already made. With Game Pass and other streaming services on consoles and PC, I think we're finally starting to see them make the mistakes that the movie streamers always did. Like Game Pass, if this is correct, is going the exact same way that Netflix did. When Netflix first hit the scene, it made its name with original programming. It set itself out from any of the competition at the time and kind of got a monopoly at the time because Netflix original meant something.
Yes.
Netflix was greenlighting projects that Hollywood, in its conventional stuck-in ways, would never greenlight. They were given $200 million so Martin Scorsese could make The Irishman, you know, where a studio like Paramount would have balked at that. And we got so many of these projects where Netflix was just throwing money and everything. It was like, give us stuff, give us content to put on our platform, give us stuff that Hollywood won't make. We'll fund it. We are a haven for filmmakers.
Just turn heads, make sure people know the name,
Get us subscribers, get us out there, make us some stuff. But then eventually, it turns out that as much as I love movies like The Irishman, spending $200 million on 10 of those a year is not a sustainable business model, especially when you don't have ads, or at least they didn't have at the time, and you rely on new subscribers and stuff. So where Netflix was once this haven for both these big movies and these movie directors who maybe fell out of the mainstream in Hollywood, and also great original TV shows and stuff like that. You know, how many shows did Netflix save that were cancelled and brought them over and gave them a second lease of life? That was great for a bit, and then suddenly, when the growth stopped as much as they wanted it to continue, we saw all of the shows start to get cancelled. We saw them cut ties with a lot of filmmakers. They instead started relying on the same people that Hollywood was relying on, like Ryan Reynolds and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And to me, that's exactly what this indicates from Microsoft. We've had that golden period where every first-party game, no matter if it's Halo or Gears, will be on their day one, where helping fund stuff like, or at least we're giving a platform to stuff like Immortality or Hollow Knight Silksong. This is a place for the big tier developers and the small tier developers. That, again, was something that could only last for a while. And now, to cut costs and make sure growth continues, we're greenlighting fewer things. Maybe we're going to think about what's on Game Pass and what we're putting on PlayStation. You know, it feels like it's going the same way that Netflix did.
No, man, I totally agree. I think for me, there's such a massive issue with Xbox marketing marketing. I feel like no one ever has any positive words to say about Xbox overtly, or didn't think about Xbox in a positive way overtly, because their footprint is just barely present. Like, we talked about Stellar Blade just before, and I feel like that is in front of YouTube videos. It's like the trailers are out there. It was part of Sony showcases. Like, the Xbox side of things, maybe it's because they don't have that many games to scream about. However, a good comparison would be when they showed off the Indiana Jones game, and for like a couple of weeks following that, you got people talking about the games again. It's never really been anything other than just make good games and people will buy them, or make notable games and people will at least talk about them. And I think in the pursuit of just having this monthly catalog of titles that gets updated, sorry, it never really feels like that remotely lived up to the same like excitement, or oh my god, like even something like, and maybe this is too personal of an example, Spotify's release radar every Friday. I get more excited for that than I do for Game Pass resetting every month. And it's not that there aren't worthwhile titles in there. Like, you know, you loved Immortality a couple of years ago. Open Roads is awesome being on there. That's a new game.
Yeah.
Which is like, you know, like reviewing fairly enough. But in general, I think they have such a massive marketing issue where they just don't get out there and talk about anything. And I think there's that assumption that they just fall back on, like, well, Game Pass is omnipresent. It's included in certain TV deals. You get certain months of Game Pass with certain products or purchases or whatever, that we don't need to get out there and do an overall exciting advert for it. But like I said, with something like Indiana Jones or whatever, at least you got people talking about titles again. And Starfield, like the tail on that's obviously been quite sour. People have dropped off it. But I feel like back in September when Starfield came out, I forget which member of Microsoft or Xbox was talking about that this is the starting pistol for Game Pass. This is the starting pistol for that regular cadence of titles. And maybe they'll eventually get there. But it's been so many, we've had so many versions of that now.
Yeah.
And those past promises of like, oh, we'll have an exclusive every month, or we'll have something every couple of months. And it's not that I don't enjoy what I've got. I'm paying for it as much as everybody else is. But I think because we're all paying for it and kind of going like, okay, is this it? Is this the culmination of your plan? Because it doesn't feel like it.
And you know what? Even Phil Spencer admitted a few years ago at this point that that initial promise to get a big release out every couple of months, they never lived up to it. And hopefully this year will be the year once it gets rolling with Indiana Jones, with Avowed, with Hellblade, and hopefully a few more. It might be too little too late, because at this point, I think people kind of know what Game Pass is, and they don't really make an effort to advertise it in the way you'd want them to. Of course, there are adverts. Of course, there are announcements about which games are coming next month. But, you know, I know that I maybe like the PlayStation Plus service more than you do. I think that's probably just as good as Game Pass for me personally.
Right.
But I think one edge that Sony has over Microsoft is making a big song and dance every month when they add new titles to it. Like, I don't have to go out of my way to find out what's being added to PlayStation Plus. It just gets served up to me in a blog post, admittedly, but it's something. It makes it feel like a bigger deal. Same with the monthly games, whereas games with gold, and if that even is a thing anymore, you know, it's hard to keep track. The monthly games on Xbox, it feels like there's less fanfare, and when there's not enough high-profile games attached to those monthly drops anyway, it makes them feel more forgettable. Like, I never know what's coming to Game Pass. Like, you reminded me of Open Roads. I completely forgot that was out there.
Well, because they didn't do any marketing for it.
Absolutely. And, you know, they put great games on there over the past few months alone. You know, they had Remnant 2 on there over Christmas. All of these titles that makes it an appealing venture if you want it, but it just feels like more of an afterthought than ever. But as we were saying, Game Pass rules, and it can be amazing when it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel like they've had those wins that permeated like the general awareness of your average gamer, let's say. Like when they added GTA 5, it was a big talking point that they were getting GTA 5 for a few weeks or a few months. Red Dead 2 being on there was a big deal.
Yes.
It was even like talked about when it got taken off Game Pass again, like these big seismic titles that you can just get for free. One, I think they have an issue with letting people know what's coming to Game Pass in a wider sense. I always feel like I see people saying, I just bought this and now it's added on Game Pass. I didn't know that was about to happen. And I get that they can't advertise that too overtly, because then you just wouldn't buy a game because you'd be waiting for it to go on Game Pass.
Yeah.
Even if it was just title specific. But I do think that's part of it. And just overall, I feel like like I said, if they're going to hang the entire business on this, like to talk about the indie side of it, where you've got the specific devs from Darkest Dungeon and Slay the Spire, maybe it literally is the model that you said, where it was just let's turn as many heads as possible. But you're not really going to turn mainstream heads with a bunch of indie deals. And in theory, it never really made sense that you were spending this much money on these bigger deals. I mean, some of the examples given here could be more to do with the Epic Store, which is in a similar place, especially in regards to how we talk about it. But that idea of just like splurging all the cash, everyone's on Game Pass, get it all on here, and then it's the bigger titles where everything's fallen down again. All the studios get acquired. You know, we were waiting forever for Starfield to be on there, and then when Starfield dropped on there, it wasn't amongst a bunch of bigger indie hitters. It's not like Game Pass has had a stellar month. Like, it's maybe one title that you're glad you're getting for free, but that's about it. You don't really look at it overall and be like, oh my God, there's 7 things I want to play.
No, that's true, but I think, I don't know, it's such a multifaceted thing. For me, the biggest word right now in the gaming space and kind of the modern media space is retention. Like, that matters so much to these major companies who, want to sell a lot of games, but would prefer you to keep playing them and buying into the ecosystem as much as possible. And I think that goes doubly when a business relies on, or at least is trying to shift into and prioritize streaming services, because those indie games, like you said, you know, they're not turning mainstream heads, but if they're enough to get people to continue subscribing for another month, I think they've kind of done their job in a way, because like you said, if I am jumping into Game Pass and there is one game I want to play, like, what they need to do is to give me a reason to just roll over that subscription and not think about it. And if there are like a handful of titles, even if they're smaller, that I'm looking forward to in February after I've subscribed in January, that's amazing. And then I think the business model, at least initially and in theory, was we'll make all of these deals with everyone. We'll get games like Hollow Knight on the platform that have a more hardcore appeal. And then, again, theoretically, we'll have a big first-party game that does turn heads every 3 or 4 months, and then we'll get new subscribers from them, and we'll be retaining the old subscribers from these guys. But that obviously hasn't worked out, because even more so than movies and television, video game production is so volatile, and you can't guarantee a constant churn of, and I hate to use the term, content like you can with TV shows. And even then, they couldn't really do it with TV shows. We looked at Marvel, you know, or Star Wars, trying to do that exact same model in a quote-unquote easier production industry. And even they're the quality, you know, nosedive. People got fed up because they were just churning stuff out to try to keep that retention on their services.
To that end as well, that idea of the deals being made and trying to supply, for me, it's like, were they trying to supplant the gap in the release schedule and trying to do as many indie deals as possible, make them really lucrative, get as many different games on the platform as possible, as many different creators talking about Game Pass as much as possible, hence the whole it's the best deal in gaming side of it that came from that. And now that you have Indiana Jones, Hellblade 2, Avowed, etc., like, assumedly all the other games that have been in production are about to drop as well, whether that's from Undead Labs or Double Fine or the rest of, Activision Blizzard, etc. Maybe that supplants the way that the model has been so far, and they don't quote unquote need those indie titles as much because they're about to hit their cadence. I'm trying to do the other side of the coin. And are they about to finally nail the thing that they set in motion when Game Pass was first mentioned as being this steady rollout of head-turning games?
There's 2 things for you here. First, to me, the idea of a gaming streaming service almost seems antithetical to what the gaming industry wants. Right? A streaming service is about giving you a bunch of new titles every month, or at the very least, access to hundreds of titles that you can jump into whenever you want. You know, you can watch an episode of Friends, you can watch an episode of Heroes if you want, if you hate yourself that much and you want to go watch season 4 of Heroes. And that's kind of like what the gaming industry is mimicked. You can go on and play Brothers in Arms if you want. You can jump into Midnight Fight Express, you can play Immortality, or you can play Halo Infinite. But is that antithetical to where the industry as a whole is going, where they want to make fewer games, but ones that you just pump your entire life into? You know, these live services that you're expected to log in, you know, day after day, do those dailies, get the new DLC, buy the season pass, get the battle pass, and constantly live on, right? Like, you can have those games, I guess, on these services, but what do these publishers actually want? And what's the most ideal revenue stream in their eyes? Is it fewer games that, you spend more time on, or is it access to a huge library? Like, what makes more sense? Like, I like access to a huge library. That's what I would pivot towards, because I think it's insane, frankly, to make a industry rely on a few major blockbusters and to the expense of everything else. But that seems to be what those big publishers are prioritizing right now.
Well, it's like, in theory, Game Pass would be the answer to the constant live service push, because you could do, Open Roads isn't a very long game, from what I've heard. You could do a series of small single-player titles with really good gameplay or really good story hooks, and they're part of the subscription anyway, and that all makes sense on the consumer side, because you're not spending £70 for a story game and then finishing it in a weekend. So in theory, Game Pass is the answer to all that stuff. But for me, one of the main issues is marketing. Like, if we talk about Phil Spencer saying he wants more of their bottom line being made up of Game Pass overall and more subscription numbers, you need to make Game Pass way more enticing, and potentially it will be by this time next year. But they're in such a weird place,
Scott, because you said, like, are they sacking off some of the indie games or focus on those smaller titles because they're about to get into this big rollout of first-party games?
Because they bought so many studios, so many chickens, they're about to finally all produce.
Apparently about to pop out a bunch of eggs. But my question is, if they're thinking about growth, Phil Spencer was talking about the capitalistic paradox of constant growth and how that limits him. Like, to me, I'm not looking at them and thinking they're going to go all in on Game Pass because they're going to give you a bunch of free stuff.
Right.
I'm thinking they're looking at their first-party lineup, looking at how high they need to get the graph and going, should we just sell some of these? Should we just sell some of these at full price and not put them on Game Pass day one? Like, to me, genuinely, if we're following the Netflix way, I can see them pivoting into that. Maybe not right now, but, with games already going multi-platform, will we get to a point where they just say, look, this model is simply not sustainable to make AAA first-party games and release them on Game Pass day one. They'll come to Game Pass eventually, but we need to sell some copies.
The other side of that would be what Sony were, in theory, going to do. Like, Sony's side was greenlight 12 live service games and then just have them all out there at once, a whole bunch of revenue streams. They're all ticking over. Everyone's happy. Like 12 Helldivers, Jeremy, do as many of them. I wonder if the Xbox side of that, if you go down the most negative version of it possible, is you take I think it's over 40 million or whatever it is, subscribers to Game Pass, and you make the majority of games on that service live service. If live service as a model was more welcome, then you can see the dollar signs in the executives' heads if that was the way forward. I still think the average consumer doesn't care about live service stuff and is rejecting live service models. It's the likes of Helldivers that punches through, whereas Foam Stars is dead and largely burying itself at this point.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I feel like you even saw Microsoft flirting with similar ideas a few years ago. For instance, making Halo Infinite's multiplayer free to play. You didn't need to buy the campaign with that game. Hey ho, you've got a Halo live service that the entire Xbox ecosystem can jump into. Obviously, didn't pan out how Microsoft 343 probably wanted, but if maybe that was a better game with better long-term support, it might have taken off. It might have proven that is, viable. I just think with the moves they've been making, the kind of doom that Phil Spencer has been approaching this year with, I guess, since the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, I wonder about the future and what shifts they're going to make. They've already had all of these layoffs. They've already had games go multi-platform. And I look at something like Sea of Thieves being top of the PlayStation Store, and I think they're going to see that money and go, yeah, okay, we'll continue maybe releasing these AAA games on Game Pass, but you can buy them for 70 quid on PlayStation if you want. We're not going to ignore that part of the market. We want the graph to go up. Might as well get that money.
Well, that is like the wider Xbox brand thing, where it's just an Xbox. They become the next Sega, where it's just the Xbox as a logo in front of a game that you play, but also that affects the viability of the interest in Xbox as a console manufacturer, because it's like, well, I might as well just hang back and these games will be on PlayStation later. They'll all be, if you bring in the wider feel of what it's like in modern gaming, they'll be patched. They'll probably have more Game of the Year type content, etc. So for me, most of that stuff works against Xbox.
Yeah.
Like it definitely works for the bottom line, but it doesn't make them enticing as a platform, as a service, etc. Like things like Sea of Thieves, Grounded or whatever coming across to different platforms, Hi-Fi Rush, you might as well have just waited.
I know you're right. You're absolutely spot on. I guess I just think if I'm Phil Spencer, which I'm not, Microsoft would be in the negative money by now. The entire company as well, not just Xbox.
No, just bring it all down.
Everything
bring it all down.
Everything gone. I would be optimistic, right, about my games. I'd be assuming we're making the best games ever. And I think if you're working on the assumption that the likes of 343 or Obsidian or whoever it is are making 9 out of 10 games, 10 out of 10 games, Bethesda or whoever it is, then you could say that the incentive would be to have something as big as a Spider-Man 2, for instance, on Xbox. And I guess they could say that the incentive is, one, it's free, quote unquote, on Game Pass if you want to buy into our ecosystem, but also you're going to get it early. You're going to get it 6 months early, 12 months early before it even comes to PlayStation, where you have to pay a premium price on it. And yeah, me and you can sit here and go, people can wait, but at the same time, the kind of sales of games shows that the majority don't wait, myself included, to a certain degree. Like the first weekend or the first couple of weekends are often the most important in a game's life, whether it's deemed a success or not. So it's like, yeah, of course, a lot of people will happily go, I'm not going to buy an Xbox just to play this game if it's coming here in 12 months. But, timed exclusivity works for a reason.
Oh, yeah. Well, they saw a huge spike in console sales when Starfield came out.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is always, it's all, the whole thing, it's like, it should and it shouldn't be more simple than it's always the games. I just feel like it always just comes back around to that. Like that's why we got into the industry in the first place. Like me and you, literally, in regards to sitting here talking about it. But it's why people cared about the industry. Like it's why you care about it as an art form. Like you can have as many different delivery methods and models as you want, that serve different corporate masters on a longer timeline.
Yeah.
And then they all get to retire with lovely packages and everything. But it's going to be the games. It's always the games. It always has been. And if you haven't got them, it's going to fall apart.
Oh, and this is why I'm cynical, despite being optimistic about Xbox as a company for the past few years, because it is all about the games. And again, in our utopia that we created, we always said Microsoft has unlimited coffers. They've got resources out the wazoo. They theoretically could buy up all of these studios and make them better. Give Obsidian the resources they need to not have to crunch a New Vegas out in 18 months or whatever it is they were given for that game. They could maybe help alleviate the crunch happening at Activision with Call of Duty, give that franchise a more sustainable model that is better for gamers, it's better for the developers, it's better for the industry as a whole. But I think that utopian dream is dying again because Phil is saying, we need constant growth. We're making all of these layoffs. And then people are saying about Game Pass that the golden goose is no longer there. And it's like, they've made a $70 billion acquisition. And now I worry they've got themselves into a hole. And now we're going, we need to dig our way out of it. How do we dig our way out of it? And unfortunately to these executives, the answer is never, well, give us a variety of games. Let the developers do whatever they want. It's like, no, we need to maximize this IP. We need to make as much profit as possible. And I worry they've gone too far in their expenditure to be able to even justify creating interesting standalone games and not focus on those handful of big hitters from these studios that I hope get more freedom under Xbox.
I'm very curious what Game Pass looks like by this time next year, because I do, like, if they manage to maintain the cadence, then you will have Hellblade, Avowed, whatever else on Game Pass, and this time next year we might think of Game Pass as being a more big first party, higher production budget on average service, and that would work better for a mainstream response to that service. And then maybe you see them get behind their marketing, because I guess at the minute, what are they going to put the marketing behind? They did a lot of it for Starfield, and you felt that, you saw it be more active, which is what I'm trying to get at with the whole marketing problem. But maybe that's why they haven't marketed Game Pass overall, because they don't have a selection of things yet. But whereas when you can make those highlight reels and sizzle reels and go, you're getting all this for one monthly fee, they can lean on that and then throw the Call of Duty stuff in, everything else.